We've heard already a lot about how popular the public lands are and how broadly supported they are. And so we're going to hear now from somebody who can give us some actual data on how popular the public lands are. So we're going to get a chance to do a deep dive into the Conservation in the West poll and the data. So I would like to welcome Kathryn Hahne, who's a director with Newbridge Strategies. Kathryn.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Awesome. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today with me. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I always jump at an opportunity to share the data and the insights from the State of the Rockies poll, aka the Conservation in the West poll. It is a very, very special survey that my firm, Newbridge Strategy, has been a part of for 15 years, or 15 surveys, 14 years. And it's very special for a couple of reasons. One, this idea that, it has been around for 15 years. It's one of the most comprehensive looks we have at the way the public perceives public lands, conservation, wildlife, wildfire, climate change in the West. And we have this amazing treasure trove of trend data going back to 2011, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but was actually, the world was very different then. We have this amazing resource where we can look back and see how voters felt about, these particular topics in the West. And we can also look at these very specific moments in time, right? So how are voters feeling about conservation in the West right after the financial crisis in 2008, and a lot of other moments that were really pivotal in our nation's history, and take a look at conservation in the context of what was going on throughout the United States and also the rest of the world at that time. Something else that also makes this poll very special is that all of the data is public. So everything that I'm going to show you today is on the Colorado College State of the Rockies poll website, and it goes back all the way to 2011. Most of the time when I conduct polling, it's for private organizations or private causes, and I'm not able to share that data with the public. We have 15 years of data on this website. You can look at not only the top line data, but the cross-tabulated data. You can also look at all the memos we've written over the years, as well as the PowerPoints. And you can really dive deep and take a look yourself at this data. So it's not just me telling you about it. You can go back after today, after you hear from me, and you can look back and look at this trend data and these particular topics yourself, which again is very, very special. And this poll is an amazing resource. We refer to this poll as the Conservation in the West poll, also the State of the Rockies poll. It's the same thing. I'm going to go back and forth probably. I'm not talking about two different things. It's the same poll. As I mentioned, this poll is one of the most comprehensive, probably one of the most comprehensive looks we have at public opinion research on conservation in the West. The reason for that is that we interview over 3,300 voters in the West every year on these topics. What does that look like? How does that break down? We're looking at just over 400 respondents in each state, which means that we can look at individual state data as well as the region as a whole, which is again very unique to this poll. A lot of the time when I'm doing research or when others are looking at research, we're either looking at like a region on its own or individual states. So the fact that we can do both in this research is very special and really helps us dive really deeply into the results. We also conduct two oversamples, one oversample to reach 200 Black voters and one oversample to reach 200 Native American voters. So that allows us to look at ethnic distinctions in the data with more confidence. We are usually in the field in January, so this data is slightly old, but that's okay. We present on this data all year because it is so relevant, and really holds up over the year. We're actually getting ready to start on our 2026 State of the Rockies questionnaire. So we really work basically about half the year on this project, which is quite remarkable. I should have said this at the beginning. My firm, Newbridge Strategy, we are a public opinion research firm based in Colorado. So I live in Denver, and I actually got stuck in traffic getting here. I'm right down the road. When we poll for candidates, we poll for Republican candidates. We also work with a Democratic firm on this poll and many other conservation projects throughout the West and across the country. FM3 Research, they are based out of California. So when we're doing this project, we're really bringing a true bipartisan lens to the research, particularly when we're crafting questions. We work together to ensure that the language is as neutral as neutral as possible. Let's just say that. As I said, there's a treasure trove of trend data. I'm going to show you some of that today. Please know that when I'm showing this trend data, depending on what year the trend data is from, we may have been interviewing in different states. So when I show the 2025 data, I'm doing an exact apples to apples comparison to the year that we were in the field. So for example, if I show you the 2011 data, I'm showing the 2025 data among the same states that we were interviewing in 2011. The other beautiful thing about State of the Rockies is that it has grown over the past 14 years / 15 surveys. So in 2011, we only interviewed in 5 states, and we've only extended that reach since then. So in 2025, we interviewed in Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and Wyoming. And that has been the same since 2018. Okay. Though much has changed in the world since 2011, we find that not much has really changed when it comes to how voters view public lands and conservation in the West. This slide shows some trend data from 2019, where we essentially ask voters to consider whether they would want their member of Congress to prioritize conservation or energy development. As you can see, since 2019, we've had just over 3 in 5 tell us that they would prioritize conservation over energy development. This year, that number was up to 72%. This is quite remarkable, and again, quite consistent with what we see not only on public lands issues, but conservation in general. In fact, conservation wins out each time we ask more specifically about potential policies that would attempt to change current public lands protections that are in place. In this case, we asked this question in 2017 at the beginning of the Trump administration. We asked it again this year, given the conversation around national monument designations. Overwhelmingly, voters in the West tell us that existing national monument designations should be kept in place. Those numbers in the middle of the blue bars are those saying that they should definitely be kept in place. So that is very, very intense support for this idea. I will tell you, we poll on a lot of different topics, a lot of public policy topics. You name it, we've probably done research on it. When it comes to conservation, there really is this overwhelming sense of pride, particularly in the West, around public lands and a feeling that they're a part of our culture and our heritage and about what makes this part of the country very special. When we dive a little bit deeper into what this looks like in terms of partisan affiliation, even Republicans, 83% of Republicans tell us that these national monument designations should be kept in place. And of course, that percentage goes up as we work our way from left to right across the slide towards the Democrat side of the aisle. This year, we wanted to take a closer look at those who said that they were supporters of the Make America Great Again movement. So we added a demographic question and asked voters whether they were supporters of that movement or not. And this is that data by that designation. So if someone told us that they were a supporter of the Make America Great Again movement, they are represented in this, the middle bars here. We had about 81% of MAGA supporters tell us that they support keeping these national monument designations in place. And not to spoil the rest of my presentation, but as you'll see, MAGA supporters really don't look all that different on conservation issues than Western voters overall. And when we ask this question of Western voters, just so you all have some context, we have about 34% saying that they are supporters of the Make America Great Again movement, 27% telling us that they are both Republican and supporters of the Make America Great Again movement. So about 1 in 3 are represented here. Our non-MAGA supporters, of course, are more supportive, but still to see 81% from to see these types of numbers from our more conservative audiences was really a story of our 2025 poll. We also asked about giving state government control over national public lands, because this has been part of the conversation as well. The exact language we used is over here on the left in big letters so you can see it. The 2017 language was a little bit different. That's listed at the bottom. But as you can see, majorities in 2017 and 65% are opposed to this idea this year. So really, again, there's no question here that voters feel a certain way about this particular policy, and really, again, I don't see these types of numbers in other type of work I do, so it's quite overwhelming. When we look specifically at this data by state, particularly in Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming, where these conversations have played out, you can see even majorities here are opposed to the idea of giving state government control over national public lands. When we dig in more specifically about housing also, as we know, particularly in Colorado, we're facing a fairly acute housing affordability crisis here. And we ask voters whether they would support building more housing within or close to existing communities, or selling off national public lands to develop housing on natural areas. As you can see, again, the response from voters in the West here is quite overwhelming. Again, in Colorado, we have 87% saying that they would prioritize housing near existing communities, and there's really this strong sense of opposition from this voter population on selling national public lands for housing needs, despite the fact that everyone in Colorado knows that we're facing such an acute housing crisis here. Montana also, even though my brother lives in Missoula, they're also facing some housing issues there as well. 90% side with the idea that we should not be selling off national public lands to build more housing. There's really this sense that public lands are not the antidote to this crisis. Let's now take a look at how Westerners are engaging with public lands and how they feel about how they're being managed or should be managed. Westerners love their public lands. Not only in this survey, but in other work we've done, that theme comes through time and time again. They feel like public lands are a part of our Western identity. They can tell you very specific stories about when they took their families or their friends to public lands and they recreated or made memories together. 9 in 10 tell us that they visited public lands in the last year. which is really an overwhelming number of folks. There are two subgroups that are a little different here. Seniors in particular are less likely to have visited national public lands in the last year, and then Black voters are less likely to have visited national public lands in the last year. But other than that, voters across all key subgroups of the electorate are going to these lands, they're appreciating them, they're spending time in them. And we gave them the opportunity to tell us why they visit public lands. And as I mentioned, they tell us, you know, hey, I love nature, I love appreciating the outdoors, it's where I make memories with my family, it's where I recreate, it's where I hunt, it's where I fish, it's where I hike, it's where I camp. This is just a summary of what they told us. There were a myriad of reasons why Western voters said that they visited national public lands, and I can tell you that because I read all 3,000 responses, which was, you know, a special time in my life, I'll say. But, you know, the stories that they tell are just beautiful, and they really reflect that love for the outdoors, and I think Westerners in particular feel for these lands, and we don't see in other parts of the country when we do conservation work. They also are really, really love the agencies that deal with public lands or manage public lands or deal with environmental or conservation issues at the federal level. We didn't give them that context. We just said, here are some different agencies. Do you approve or disapprove of the job that they're doing? The National Park Service rises to the top here. For voters, they really think about that really sweet, you know, National Park Service employee with their hat or Smokey the Bear. So there's really something for them to grasp onto visually when they're thinking about the National Park Service. They've more than likely interacted with these workers or employees. So 86% tell us they approve of the job of the National Park Service, with almost a majority saying that they strongly support or strongly approve the job of the National Park Service. We work our way down from there. The Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, and the EPA, all, you know, 3 and 5 are telling us that they approve of the job these agencies are doing. The EPA does get a little bit of a political, I guess, it just gets a little political with the EPA, right? Not only with the work the EPA does, but the name, the Environmental Protection Agency, you would think would not be partisan, but that word environmental can be a bit partisan. So that's why we're a little bit lower there. We do see a drop off among our Republican and conservative friends in terms of their approval of that agency. And those ratings have stayed fairly consistent since 2017. In fact, voters feel a little bit better about some of these agencies within margin of error or so, and we didn't ask the EPA in 2017, so that's why it's not shown on this slide. We also dug in a little bit deeper. We said, okay, you know, how do you feel about these agencies? Do you approve of the job that they're doing? But we got more specific about funding, right? Because it really comes down to, you know, you can approve of an agency all you want, but do you want to fund them or not? And what we found is overall, 3 and 4 are opposed, with a majority strongly opposed to reducing funding to these agencies. Our Republicans just slightly lower there in terms of their opposition to reducing funding, but we have almost 7 in 10 here telling us that funding should not be reduced to these agencies. I mean, that's incredible. Like, I work with this group of voters all the time, and they're very tax averse and they're very sensitive to funding questions. So this is really strong data here in terms of the fact that there are slight differences by party affiliation, but we still have over a majority, and in fact, a pretty solid majority of both Republicans and independents saying that funding should not be reduced to these agencies. There was some discussion about replacing career professionals with new officials earlier this year. And so we posed that question to voters, asked them whether they would prefer career professionals to be in place in these agencies or new officials with different perspectives. Again, we have, regardless of party affiliation here or party registration, majorities, in fact, solid majorities, almost 9 in 10, regardless of registration, are saying that they would prefer career professionals be making decisions about public lands, water, and wildlife in the coming year. In terms of management, current management of Native American sacred sites and cultural sites, voters also consistently tell us, we've asked this question in 2021 and 2023 and this year as well, voters believe that Native American tribes should have more input or greater input into decisions made about any type of culturally important or sacred site. And this is consistent regardless of what ethnic group one might fall into. We also ask a few questions every year, or normally every year, because there's always some type of discussion going on about energy development and public lands. So I'm going to show you 2 slides. They're going to look exactly the same, but they're going to show 4 policies that we asked voters about and asked whether they would support or oppose each. The first slide is going to show you just the data among Western voters, so everyone in the region. The second slide is going to show you that data among voters who said they were a supporter of the Make America Great movement. And we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so here are those 4 policies. We summarized them on the slide. Of course, there wasn't enough space to put the full language on the slide. But essentially, we asked about oil and gas companies paying for cleanup and restoration of drilling sites, requiring oil and gas companies to use updated technology to avoid methane leaks, and that these and asked whether these companies should be drilling in areas that have a high likelihood to produce. As you can see, again, very solid results here. We have almost 3 in 4 telling us that they would support all of these. That last policy there is about allowing more drilling and mining on some areas like national public monuments, right? So a bit flipped there in terms of it being something that voters, we would hope oppose. And they do. We have a majority opposed to this idea here. So this was all Western voters. I'm now going to show you what this data looks like among Make America Great Make America Great Again supporters. I should just say MAGA. I'm going to flip back and forth. So not much difference here, right? Our MAGA voters don't look too much different than our Western voters overall, which would, of course, include our Democrat voters, our all other type of voters in that big group. The one difference is, of course, on that bottom policy there, to allow more drilling and mining on national public lands. They are up 10, 13 points from where our Western voters are overall, but we still have a majority opposed to this policy, right? So that, to me, is a win from a conservation perspective. When we look more specifically at this slide, at that policy by state, I also want to draw your attention to our results from Wyoming, right? So Wyoming, a very, very oil heavy state. They're also very, tend to be more one of our more conservative states in this mix. Even a majority in Wyoming are opposed to the idea of removing protections on these existing national public lands for drilling, mining, and other development. I have two more slides on two of the other policies I just highlighted. I just here wanted to show the intensity of support for keeping this requirement for cleanup for oil and cleanup and restoration for oil and gas companies. We have 80%, over 4 and 5 in Colorado and Wyoming telling us that they support this idea. Again, with Wyoming being as dependent on oil and gas as they are economically, this was, a very important number here, and we have very solid support regardless of what state voters live in. We've also asked this question about only drilling in areas that are highly likely to produce oil and gas, two previous years, two previous surveys, and that those results are very solid as well. I'll wrap up with some information about some data about royalty rates. We keep in mind we were in the field before the passage of the Big Beautiful Bill this summer, but back in January we had a plurality telling us that royalty rates should be increased, 1 in 3 telling us they should be kept about the same as today, and only about 12%, 1 in 10 telling us that they should be decreased. And even when we look at these percentages or this data by party again, you can see that there really is not widespread support at all for decreasing royalty rates. In fact, Republicans, about 1 in 3 say that they should be increased, and 43% are saying they should be kept the same as today. Democrats, of course, are more supportive of increased royalty rates. 65% tell us that they should be increased, and only 10% are telling us that they should be decreased. And those MAGA numbers there look very similar to our Republican numbers. Because we are in Colorado, I wanted to just provide some Colorado-specific data. We do ask state-specific questions on the State of the Rockies poll occasionally. This year, we asked a Colorado and New Mexico question. In the past, we've asked a state-specific question in every single state. So again, if something to look for, if you're interested in a particular state that's part of this poll. But we asked specifically about drilling on public lands in the Thompson Divide area, and really, again, solid opposition here with almost a majority, strongly opposed, and only about 1 in 3 in support. That is all I have in terms of slides. I'm here for another few minutes to answer questions or have a discussion. I really would encourage you all to visit the State of the Rockies website. You will be hopefully stunned by the amount of data that is on there, and we find that the poll gets used at all levels of government, whether it's the White House or in Congress or at the local level. So would really encourage you to check that out. And please let me know if you have any questions after the presentation. I can stick around for a few minutes, or I'm sure you have my email. You can find it on our website. I'm happy to be a resource for anything conservation related or otherwise. This is really important work to our firm, and we feel really passionately about it. So happy to be of help however we can. Thank you.
Kathryn, Thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful. Please let us know if you have questions. Use the Slido tool. I have a few questions. We have a couple here as well. But I'm wondering first if you could maybe just talk a little bit more about the origin of the polling effort. You know, whose idea was this? Where did it come from? It's been going on for 15 years now, so that's quite a history. But I just wonder if you could share a little bit about the origin story with us.
Gosh, yes, that's a great question. I wish my colleagues were here to share with you because they've been here since the beginning and they have some really wonderful stories to share about how it got started. I've only been a part of the poll for about 8 years, but it got started because they're essentially, the conservation community was in need of data to essentially take to elected officials and say, hey, people care about these issues. They care about wildlife and wildfire and climate change and all of these things because they affect our public lands. And we Westerners feel so passionately about our public lands that really it sprang from the conservation community and their need for data to sort of back up their work on the Hill and in other places. So yeah, we've been so lucky that it's gone on for so long and have received, academic sponsorship from Colorado College for such a long time, and it's such an important piece of work. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, but we hear about it being an important piece of research all the time, and we present on it all year. So. It really is very special.
And I'm curious about the focus on the Rockies, and you haven't presented data from the West Coast states, and so I'm just wondering if there's also anything to you could say about that, and other data also from different parts of the country.
Yeah, so, the West Coast states are very different. So adding in a California or an Oregon is very different. I think that as Coloradans, we would say that Colorado is very different. We have this, Western way that is not the same as a Washington or an Oregon or a California. And I think the other states that we survey in have similar. We have similar. We're more similar maybe than those states are. So we do a lot of conservation work in those states as well, just in separate projects. And Californians also, those voters in those states, Oregon, Washington, and California, do also feel very passionately about conservation in their public lands, but they look very different than the public lands that are out in the West. So there has not been a push to include those states because there also is a wealth of conservation work that's being done in those states already. So this feels very separate. It's pretty difficult to do work in places like Wyoming and Montana because the populations are smaller. So there's not much public work, for example, that goes on in those states and Idaho, just because they are so much smaller, and it's more difficult to reach folks in those states.
We have a question about your methodology. You said your methodology calls out Black and Native American voters. Did you include Hispanic voters also, or have you thought about, the additional polling to address that population?
Yes, that's a great question. So Hispanic voters, we get enough on the natural, sort of the way, just given the makeup of the states, in the 8 states we poll, we get enough of a sample size that we're able to look at them on their own without oversampling. So the oversampling is just to ensure that we're able to speak with confidence about those 2 groups in particular, because we do have, we can look at Hispanics on their own. And we actually have an entire top line and memo dedicated to voters of color in the West on the State of the Rockies website. So if that's something you're interested in, you can look at the data broken out specifically by each demographic group.
Okay, and there's a question also about urban versus rural voters. And so have you attempted to distinguish or to poll for differing views in urban and rural voters, and what kind of results have you seen?
Yes. Urban and rural voters are very different. We do ask a demographic question to ensure that we are getting the right mix of urban, suburban, and rural. And, I only had 30 to 40 minutes today, so I really only showed the political affiliation data here because it really was the biggest story of this poll. But we have a ton more breakdowns, urban, suburban, rural being one of them. You can also look at this data by age, I mentioned state, by ethnic group. You can look at gender age. You can look at urban, suburban, rural by age. So really there are a ton of breakouts. Urban and rural voters are very different. Urban voters, as we know, tend to be a bit more left-leaning. They tend to be a bit younger. Rural voters tend to be a little more conservative-leaning, and they tend to be a bit older. And so they are very different in their views. When it comes to conservation, there really aren't a ton of distinctions by urban, suburban, rural. We have, I think urban voters tend to be, you would think that they would be maybe less supportive because they aren't seeing public lands every day or accessing public lands every day, but that doesn't tamper their enthusiasm around public lands at all. They still see these lands as a very special part of their Western heritage. They see it as a place to get away from the city, and they feel very protective over these lands as well. So there are some distinctions, but when it comes to conservation, we don't see that really as much. If we were to go into maybe a different topic, like climate change, that I would say that there are some distinctions, urban, suburban, rural, and it sort of waters down to being about party affiliation, quite honestly.
We have another question about your methodology. And so there was a question about the process for crafting the questions each year.
Yes.
And how do you get at that? And you just mentioned climate change also. And I'm curious if you thought about how to incorporate the public's views on climate change into these questions about conservation. And so if you could talk a little bit about broadly how you craft the questions, and then, if you thought about that climate change issue.
Sure. It's a very timely question because, as I mentioned, we've already started crafting the questions for 2026, even though we won't be in the field until January, February time. So we work with a coalition of conservation organizations that have been brought on to this project. It's a very sort of far-reaching invitation, and those organizations can weigh in on what they're seeing, what would help them, what they need data on, and we work with Colorado College. Also, they have a student component of the State of the Rockies poll. So we usually add a couple questions in for the students because then the students do a deep dive on the data as well. So it's really this, it's not just me sitting down and being like, this is what I'm going to write on the State of the Rockies project this year. It's like this, it is a multi-month process where we are really refining our language. We are getting down to the most important pithy questions in the conservation world that need to be asked that year, and it is many Zoom calls. So that's sort of what the process looks like. In terms of climate change, again, I've really only given you all a very small taste today of what we asked on the State of the Rockies poll this year. We did also cover climate change. We have some really fascinating data on how public perception has changed since 2011 on climate change. Spoiler alert, voters have become only more concerned about the impacts of climate change over time. So to see that as a trend line, as a data nerd, it just like blows my mind. I mean, we all know this. We all know this, right? That concern about climate change has become more heightened, but to see that in raw data and raw numbers is really cool. This year, we also asked a question about community preparedness. So how prepared do you feel your community is to handle the effects of, we didn't use the word climate change because that phrase is very politicized, but we use different words like to handle wildfire and flooding and things like that to get at that idea. And we have some data on that question as well. So there's always a bit of climate change mixed in. We have a couple questions on wildlife, a couple wildfire questions in there. We really cover a wide range of topics. Last year was a big water year. There was a lot going on water. So we had an entire section on water and the Colorado River. Or that may have been the year before. It all starts to run together when you've been doing 8 years of it. But we've had, depending on what the topic of the day sort of is and how we can best help out these organizations, that is the direction that the questions go.
That's interesting. People also had a question about water and whether you had pulled on that topic. So I'm glad you just touched on that. Yeah.
We have so much on water. And like I said, it ranges from very specific questions about the Colorado River District, not the Colorado River District, but just the Colorado River, to just very broad questions about how serious of a problem is, lower water levels in rivers. So we go from very specific to very broad.
The data on the Make America Great Again movement seems to have also triggered a few interesting questions.
Okay.
And so, one question is, why do you think that MAGA and the Republican elected officials seem to be unresponsive to their constituents' opinions on these issues? I wonder if you have anything to add on that.
Yeah, it's a good one. So I think something to keep in mind is that we have all this amazing data on conservation and support for public lands. When you ask voters a question about how they would rank certain issues that are important to them, conservation, unfortunately, does not break into the top 5 or 10 issues that come to voters' minds off the top of their heads, right? They're thinking about the economy. They're thinking about the cost of living. They're thinking about immigration. So many other things come to mind first, and it's really difficult to move the needle on conservation issues because there's just so much also information out there in general. It's hard to break through, but it's not top of mind for voters. So when we ask them specific questions about these things, they're like, oh yeah, of course I support this. And, I think about my family being on these public lands and I visit them, I fish on them, I recreate on them. But really what it comes down to is like, it's the economy. It's stupid, right? Like there's so many other things that come to the fore.
That makes sense. And, another person had a question, is there an effort to poll voters on whether they understand in what ways current leadership is not supporting their values? And so is there kind of a way to get at that through a polling effort?
So there are efforts. They are not public efforts, unfortunately. They're sort of more behind the scenes, private polling efforts. But yes, that work is being done.
Interesting. So there's a question on drilling in high potential areas.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So that's a really interesting question. I think something that's pertinent to what's happening right now. So can you expand on support for drilling in high potential areas? And are there nuances to that in sensitive wildlife areas or cultural resource areas? So did you maybe drill down into those issues a little bit deeper?
So we didn't in this poll. Here's that question again. The exact language that we asked is at the bottom of each slide. So this is the language that we asked. So it was, please tell me if you would support or oppose each one. And this one was only allowing oil and gas companies the right to drill in areas of public land where there's high likelihood to actually produce oil and gas. We did not get into the specifics of that. Again, it's really difficult. One of the challenges of the State of the Rockies project is we have only so much time for specificity, and generally we have to stay quite broad. So in this case, we did not drill down on those sort of intricacies of the policy.
Interesting. So it's really about restricting oil and gas companies to drilling in those areas, or limiting them in some way to drilling in those high potential areas.
Yes.
Okay. So a question that's relevant for the students here: what are you finding with respect to younger voters? And how are they responding to questions about public lands and conservation?
I love this question because I like to think I'm still a younger voter. So for pollsters, it's like we have specific age groups, 18 to 34, 35 to 44, 45 to 50, anyways. And so whenever you pass into a different age group, it's always like the worst day as a pollster, because you're like, people are like, do you care about turning 30? And I'm like, no, I don't care about turning 30. I care about turning 35, because that means I go into the next age group. So anyways, yes, younger voters are different. They have more intense concerns, of course, about climate change. And they are also much more concerned about the impacts of climate change. I would say they're sort of quicker to pick up on, like, oh, flooding and fire is directly related to the effects of climate change in a way that other generations or other age groups are not. Younger voters tend to be very in support of public lands and conservation generally. I think also since COVID, that intensity has only increased because most younger voters and voters in general in the West felt as though that was their way to get out of their house, right? Like, we still had all these lands open to us. And I mean, I was in Colorado for the pandemic, and I mean, that was like such a reprieve to like get out on these lands. They were still open, and it made things feel a little better, right? So I think that COVID had an impact as well on younger voters, and that intensity of support for these issues and getting behind efforts to minimize the effects of climate change are really prevalent in younger age groups as well.
And do you have data on, how conservation ranks? You talked earlier about conservation doesn't usually rank at the top of the list for voters. How does that play out with respect to younger voters? And then also, are younger voters voting? So do you have data on that?
Yeah. Again, I think it's difficult because younger voters are feeling the effects of cost of living more so than any other generation, probably. They want to be homeowners and can't be homeowners. They want to, be able to afford the things that their parents could afford and don't feel like they can have the same life. So I don't have exact numbers for you at this moment in terms of like, where do younger voters rank conservation in a list of various other topics. But I think younger voters feel those cost of living sort of elements, and that housing especially, they feel them very deeply, and more so maybe than other generations. We did ask a question in this survey, and have for the past couple of years, about how serious of a problem you feel as though cost of living is in your state. That was off the charts, right? So we have probably over 4 in 5, almost 9 in 10 telling us that the cost of living in the West is an extremely or very serious problem. But still, even with that concern and voters telling us how serious of an issue they feel as though cost of living is here, of which cost of housing is an element of that, we still have them telling us that all of these conservation policies and public lands are an important part of the West and the mix. So I don't I don't have a list for you, but there may be some public data out there. The NBC News poll is a great one. There's some other great ones out there too, where they ask voters, to rank their rank issue importance, and you might be able to pull some cross-tabulated data from there and look at those results by age.
Interesting. Okay, last question. This is obviously really compelling data, and so I think folks are curious about what's being done to communicate out and share these results.
Oh my gosh. So much. More can always be done. So please, if you have an opportunity to take these results and shout them far and wide, please do. We go every year to brief members of Congress. We go, it's been Zoom recently, but we will go in person and brief members of Congress and various committees. These results are published in news articles. They're sometimes on TV or the radio. So we really feel as though we get a lot of good coverage of the poll, but more is always better. So please take these results. Please, I think they're going to be, Annie said she was going to email them out to everyone after the presentation. Please take this data. Please visit the State of the Rockies website and get it out there more, because more people need to know, especially in the West, and our elected officials need to know how important these lands and this work is to so many of us who live in the West.
Okay, thank you so much, Kathryn. Please join me in thanking Kathryn.
Thank you.